From the time I was 7 years old, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. It was my calling to heal and save lives. So I had a hard time understanding how someone who was supposed to be a healer could be accused of murder. This is 2-year-old Benjamin. His parents, a doctor and a nurse, were charged with killing him. Today, in an exclusive interview, Benjamin's parents are speaking out. Did they have anything to do with the death of their son? Crime correspondent Melissa Moore is here with the story. So Melissa, it gets everybody interested. A doctor and a nurse accused of murdering their defenseless 2-year-old child. What was the community's reaction?
Well, this became a high-profile case right from the beginning. The community was divided in taking sides. Some wondered, were they being treated differently because the son was adopted from Taiwan? And then also the medical community was divided because of the science of child abuse.
Which is really unclear. I thought it was, but I've learned differently. And I must say, in my mind was the idea that this man might be given a break because he's a doctor, his wife as well because she's a nurse, or maybe it's the opposite. They're held to a higher standard. Thank you very much, Melissa. So after a 3-month investigation, Dr. James and Edelyn Yip were charged with child endangerment. Murder was the charge in the death of their son, Benjamin. But 6 years later, the charges were dropped. The Yips now join me. Thank you very much for being here. Edelyn? Doctor, let's start with your son's medical condition. Tell us a little bit about the problems that you identified as you were adopting him.
Well, it appeared that he had some minor medical problems when he was in the orphanage. He had a problem with something called tracheomalacia, which is a bit of a little breathing problem. There was a question of whether or not one of his kidneys was a little misshapen. But it didn't appear that there were a large number of problems or that they were very severe.
He has a twin, Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Any problems with Jonathan?
Not nearly to the level of Benjamin. He didn't have any demonstrated problems of significance in the orphanage.
So the Yips allowed us to look at Benjamin's medical records, which, as you can see from my medical unit carrying these papers, is quite extensive. That's for a 2-year-old. Looking through these records, the months before Benjamin died, he was admitted to the hospital for several health issues, and I've jotted these down. There was malnourishment, there was vomiting, dehydration, kidney failure, vitamin deficiencies, staph infection, several healing fractures in the hands and feet. I mean, this is a remarkable list of problems. You know, in medicine, Dr. Paige, since you're a physician, you know this, but when you get a chart that's this thick, you know there's a big problem. And that's for a 2-year-old. How do you explain all of this?
Well, I don't think there is a good explanation, and we never got a good explanation from any of the physicians that we saw. I was investigating non-anatomical, non-physiological potential causes on my own, but we continue to be in this process of trying to find an answer.
So let's go back to the day that your son, Edelyn, if you can help me with this, to say the day your son was found unconscious. What happened?
I stayed home that day because he wasn't feeling well. He had a feeding tube, and the feeding tube alarm went off. So I went into his room, and I found him unresponsive.
Unresponsive. You're a nurse.
Yeah.
You know what that means. He's not moving, not reacting.
He wasn't breathing right.
So what did you do?
I freaked out. I called 911, and I forgot how to do CPR. I forgot the rate of chest compressions to breaths. I turned him on his side, and he had some food that came out of his mouth, and I freaked out.
There are people watching who are going to say you're a trained nurse. How can you forget CPR when you need it most?
I'm a mom, first of all, and nothing could ever prepare you in finding your child not responsive and not breathing. So I couldn't remember.
When the EMS group came, you were there with your son. I gather he was relatively lifeless at the time. When did you realize that he had passed?
I didn't know what was happening when they told us that it was a very terrible thing and it was a grave situation. I was in shock. I could not believe that they were thinking that he was dying, because we did everything we can for him.
I think the thing is that he was on life support for several days before he actually passed.
Can I show everybody what the medical records have revealed?
Sure.
So, because you allow us to look through the records, we don't have the actual images, but we have a pretty good idea of what the doctors were dealing with. And I want everyone to understand what issues were raised, because then you'll begin to appreciate why there were accusations made. And we all have to look at this and try to decide in our own minds what we think happened. So, in the chart it says that Benjamin had a subdural hematoma. That means that he had somehow injured part of his head, and there was bleeding under the surface of the skull. You notice it's supposed to be completely symmetrical, and this is not symmetrical. And that caused a shift. You notice these white lines are not in the middle, the white lines are pushed over, and this black circle is supposed to be some space in your brain. It's completely missing here, right? So this means there was some head trauma that pushed the brain over and may have caused a lot of these injuries. There were also bilateral retinal hemorrhages. So in the back of the eye, there was bleeding, and this is, together with this other findings, considered classic for shaken baby syndrome. Shaken baby syndrome is now known as abusive head trauma. Dr. Yip, when you heard these findings, when they were shared with you, what were your first thoughts?
Well, I went to medical school as well, and this is the classic triad of shaken baby syndrome. So I knew that we would be accused.
Adeline, when did you realize that doctors were thinking that you might be responsible for your child's injuries and subsequent death?
When he was flown to Sacramento at a hospital there, and the doctor told us about what they were thinking about, I was horrified. How could they, after all the things that we've done and after his long history of being ill, think that we would hurt our son?
Just to clear the air, I'm going to ask the question. Did you or your husband ever abuse your son, Benjamin?
No.
And it's hurtful to hear those accusations.
I've heard those accusations, but I know I did not do anything to hurt my son.
Were you angry about the accusations?
Well, yes. I mean, I think I know why they happened, but now I'm more upset knowing about the science.
Up next, what caused Benjamin's injuries and why was his brain swelling? The answers when we come back. Benjamin Yip was just 2 years old when his mother, a nurse, found him unresponsive in his room. In a panic, she says she forgot how to do CPR. For reasons still unclear, Benjamin did not survive. We are back with Benjamin's parents, Dr. James Yip and his wife, Adeline. Dr. Yip, as you would take your son, Benjamin, who you had adopted when, how old was he?
He was 15 months when he came. I'm sorry?
18.
18 months, sorry,
Yeah.
when he came home.
So your adopted son comes into your home, you're taking him to doctors because things aren't right. What diagnoses that sort of unify the problem are you hearing? You must be doing research on your own as well.
Yes, absolutely. There was no diagnosis. We had a number of people look at him, from his primary care doctor to specialists at other institutions, and they were focused on specific parts of his diagnosis, but not really a unifying diagnosis.
What do you think was wrong with him?
Well, I'm unsure myself why he was so ill to start with.
So after the paramedics rushed Benjamin to the ER and examined him, doctors believed his condition was consistent with something called shaken baby syndrome, which many of you have heard of. It's called by physicians abusive head trauma. After a 3-month investigation, Dr. Yip and his wife, nurse Adeline, were arrested and charged with murder, child abuse. Dr. Yip is a doctor. What's it like to be arrested and charged with the abuse of your child and the death of your child?
Well, obviously, perhaps not, but obviously it speaks to the core of what I am pledged to do, which is to help people. And it is against that core value. And when it occurred, it was something that made me very upset. I was arrested at my place of work in front of all of my patients.
Why wouldn't you just go turn yourself in?
We actually agreed to cooperate with the sheriff's office if they chose to do that, but they chose to show up unexpectedly and do so, and arrest me there.
To make a statement, in your opinion?
I don't know. Obviously they never actually made specific accusations about who did what. It's my belief that I was arrested in an attempt to use the arrest as leverage to either turn against my wife or somehow, because of loss of income, be willing to make a deal.
Adeline, the theory is that you were the last person with your son. You delivered a fatal blow to his head. It led to that bleeding and the swelling and the other challenges and problems that we talked about when I was showing those images. How do you respond as a mother to that accusation?
I didn't do it. I took care of my son every day, and I did not hit him.
So after the arrest, authorities took away your 2 other children.
Yeah.
So compounding an accusation.
Actually, before the arrest.
Yeah.
They took the children away from you beforehand.
Yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
They took the children away the day after Benjamin went to the hospital. So he was in the hospital dying, and Child Protective Services ripped our children away from our friends.
How do you deal with that, grieving for the loss of one son while seeing your other 2 children taken from you?
You can't. You can't grieve. We have not had a time to fully grieve.
How long were they taken from you for?
They were gone almost a year.
A year?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me just touch on one other issue, because I'm still stunned by this. You're both working folks, like so many couples in America.
Yes.
There were other caregivers involved with your 3 children, all adopted. Is there a possibility that someone who cared for Benjamin may have been involved in these injuries?
No. No.
We don't believe
We
so.
don't think so. I was the one who was a primary caregiver.
So if anything happened, you would have known about it.
Yes.
Up next, a surprising twist in the case. Shaken baby syndrome may not have caused Benjamin's death. So what did, and who was to blame? We're back with a doctor and nurse who were accused of murdering their son. Benjamin was just 2 years old when he died after arriving unresponsive to the ER. Doctors found his condition consistent with shaken baby syndrome. Benjamin's parents, Dr. James Yip and his wife Adeline, are back with us. From the beginning, both of you vehemently denied the charges, the accusations that you were responsible for shaken baby syndrome. So if that's not why Benjamin died, why do you think he died?
I think he aspirated. He swallowed some of the food that he ate that evening. It got dislodged into his lungs. Because when I turned him over, there were pieces of carrots and potatoes that were coming out of his mouth. So I think he aspirated.
So after more than 6 years of fighting to prove their innocence, prosecutors dropped the charges. Big move. How does it feel to be out from under those allegations?
It's freeing, but you know, there's some not being able to believe it's finally over.
Can I bring in an expert in this area? Because I want to get to this issue of shaken baby syndrome. What is it really? An attorney involved, Paige Kaneb from the Innocence Project, is joining us now. Paige, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hess.
I'm stunned here. I'm looking at a couple of medical professionals who are accused of murdering their child for reasons that I completely understand. At least I thought I did. You know, head injuries, bleeding in the eye, things that are consistent with this shaken baby syndrome, which I thought I understood. Why did the prosecutors drop the charges?
So this was really a case of guilty until proven innocent. And part of what happens in these cases is when doctors see these injuries, these findings, they've been trained that this is shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma. And so they tell the prosecutors that, and they of course believe the experts. So we really had to prove that the Yips were innocent, that Benjamin had had this lifelong serious illness, that he was unable to shake these infections. And that ultimately led to the stroke, which is one of the things we had to show them, was that strokes can cause subdural hematomas, which I know is one of your questions. So this all started with a British neurosurgeon who was looking at a baby, had a subdural hematoma, and he was wondering, how does this baby have this internal trauma and no external signs of trauma, no bruises, no skull fracture, no swelling? And he came up with shaking, this idea that maybe you shake a baby and that's how you get this internal injury with no external injury. And so he wrote a paper to warn people about the dangers of
It's like taking an egg and shaking it really hard, right? You'll scramble the egg on the inside, but the shell will still be intact. That's the basic concept.
Exactly. Right? And that turned into this rash of diagnoses. There are thousands of potentially innocent people in prison or who've had their families ripped apart because of this diagnosis. And it got so bad that British neurosurgeon who first came up with it came out in 2012 and said, this is just a hypothesis, and it's still an unproven hypothesis.
Edeline, you're the face of this now. How are you recovering?
Not knowing what the new normal is quite yet. It's been very difficult because now a lot of people know about it and our children have questions. And we've come to realize that we're not alone in this battle. We were very fortunate to have our community stand behind us and our faith. We were told that if we wanted our kids back, we had to get a divorce. And we said, no, we did not do anything. We want our children back. We stood firm on our belief and knowing that we're innocent. And we fought to get to where we are today.
I would have thought you just put this behind you. But you've agreed to come on the show and tell your story.
Yes.
Why?
Well, I think we want to encourage people who may be accused to actually be honest with themselves, and don't let somebody convince you that you've done something wrong. This is not medical certainty, no matter what they're told. And it seems that our attitude now is to believe an accusation immediately as it is made. And I hope that the public will return to the true belief in innocence until proven guilty.
I wish you the best with your two children.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.